Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the very start of season 2 of Get to the Good Part. We're jumping right back in to the shit with chapter 15 of Ready Player One, a chapter that begins shortly after the stacks have been blown to pieces. What else can you say about it?
It's one of those wow moments. How do you continue a chapter after something like that? Like, what's the next move after, oh, dude just blew up your home and everyone around it?
Well, you go check your email.
What?
What else would you do?
I'd pull up my phone. Hold on, I would check Facebook. I've got to get an Instagram of this. Selfie next to the stacks.
Hey, you got to see a friendly face, man.
Hashtag IOI sucks.
But that's how chapter 14 ends. It ends on the line, I desperately needed to see a friendly face. And so the first person he calls, of course, is H, right? And H, of course, answers within the first couple of rings. We had talked about this when we were doing notes for the show. This is a really interesting chapter to me. And I'm probably overthinking it, but, that's why we have a podcast. I think this is a really interesting view on the character of Wade. Throughout the beginning part of the chapter, he's kind of talking about or reminiscing about, the people who lived in the stacks. It's occurring to him that his aunt and, step uncle or whatever the fuck you want to call him, Rick, the garbage, the dumpster fire that was Rick as a human being is now dead. But he thinks about Mrs. G, and it occurred to me when I read that part of the chapter that there really is nobody in real life that Wade has to connect with anymore.
I think that's almost an advantage, because if you think about some of the great stories that are out there, you can't be more powerful while you're alive. But if you can somehow create influence while people perceive you as dead, you reach a level of godlike status. And you could almost say that Halliday has reached that place. I mean, he's dead, but he's reached a godlike status, almost a ghostly presence over the oasis that people acknowledge now. But with no one else alive, technically alive, that knows he is still alive, at this point he's scared. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, holy crap, he could be an incredibly powerful presence while people think he's dead.
So you're going back to the common trope, and I think we've discussed this before on the podcast, but I guess we'll flesh it out a little more now, that every great story has an orphan. Harry Potter, orphan. Luke Skywalker, orphan. I could go on, but I won't.
That wasn't quite the direction I was going with, but that's a good point.
Yeah. So are you saying that like his power sort of lies in like having no ties to the earthly world?
I think his powers lie in absolute anonymity now.
Okay.
And by being believed him to be dead, he is not going to be looked at for a while. Like, he's not going to be hunted. He could kind of survive and persist in the world, and they think he's dead.
Okay,
they're going after someone else now.
That's sort of an aside point from what I was talking about.
Right.
Yeah,
but I liked where you're going with that, though.
It made me kind of think about whether or not, if he's like progressing in the oasis after they think they'd killed him, can they like look up his avatar and see like if he's leveling up or anything?
Great question. Because throughout the chapter, that was something that I was consistently thinking about. Because he wakes up, he just immediately goes back into the oasis as Parzival. Pretty quickly, right?
Right.
Pretty darn quickly.
Was it? I'm getting a little muddled here. But was it the end of chapter 14 or the beginning of chapter 15 that he basically he logs back in and he's on Ludus? It is the beginning of chapter 15.
Yes, it's the beginning of chapter 15, and he sees the 6er gunships. And then he ducks for cover because he doesn't want them to see him. But then he's like, oh, wait a minute. It's a no PvP zone. I'll be safe. But he never says, oh, they think I'm dead. I don't want them to know that I'm alive. Like that, I don't think that ever really registered with him as a character, that like I can use my apparent death to my advantage.
Yeah, it never fleshed out like I had hoped it would in this chapter. This was just his apparent shock in going into the oasis and then realizing all hell broke loose. Like it didn't even matter anymore.
Mm.
I thought, if I was his character, I would have taken the money. In the last episode, we were talking about would we take the money. In this episode, it's apparent that they know where it is. They're going in. They're beating it. He could have taken the money, and it wouldn't have mattered.
It wouldn't matter to him, though.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a character with morals and principles and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm a character without.
Yeah, it's like somebody's waving. What was it, $5 million was the first one, and then
when you put it that way, I don't mind actually not having more.
Guys, I don't know if you played D&D out there, but Chris's character was always a roguish dickhead.
No, I've never played D&D, but I really want to.
It's role playing. It's not my real me. Well, it might be a little bit real me.
Yeah. I think there's a whole Freudian id conversation to be had about that, Chris. But
another episode.
Yeah, another episode. At any rate, what I'm kind of getting at is, there's a lot of conversation. We won't get too into spoiler territory here, but there's a whole lot of conversation about how Wade treats his relationship with Artemis going forward in the book. Specifically, how he kind of takes a little break from the competition of it all, and focuses primarily on his relationship with Artemis. Now, I know there's a couple people listening, Ray, one of them that is fully on Team Artemis here. This is one point where I'm on Team Wade. Now, imagine, he goes through this sort of awful childhood. He loses his mom at a pretty young age. His dad, he barely remembers, right? He moves into basically a laundry room and, with Aunt Alice and Uncle Dickhead. And he has to just kind of figure it out on his own, right? And he does a pretty good job at doing that. And he makes some friends in the Oasis along the way. But Mrs. G was sort of an anchor point for him in the stacks. It was like to me, it was like his connection with reality. It was his one last bastion of, people can be good. You know what I mean? Like there are good people in the world, because he didn't have that. Even people at school sucked. People that he lived with sucked. There's really no connection with that inherent good of humanity. And I think the book touches on that at a lot of different points, that, whether or not humanity is still inherently good, but he finds good in Artemis. I think he finds it in H2 and stuff like that. But, he's going through his formative years. He finds it in a girl, and he throws all of his chips in. Now, a lot of people say that, Wade is immature. Wade's not being realistic. Wade is being too desperate and all that kind of thing. But to a certain degree, I kind of connect with Wade here throughout the book, because, if you lose everything, of course you're going to cling to something, right?
Well, the thing is, everything you just described about Wade sounds like a typical teenage boy.
A typical teenage boy doesn't have their everything they know blown up.
Except for that, but
except for the everything blown up part.
Except for that part, but or maybe there's a few people that have shit blow up in their face from time to time. But his behavior as a kid is very stereotypical teenage boy.
Sure.
He's stupid, makes a lot of dumb mistakes, particularly with women. I see him as he's just your typical kid making typical kid mistakes. And,
and even, I agree. And even in this chapter, he's not thinking of my shit just got blown up. He's thinking I'm jealous of H.
That's a thing.
Yes.
At one point.
Exactly.
At one point. Yes.
But psychologically, that's not the kind of thing that hits you on, I think, a very blatant level. I think it's probably something, because you think about it, his aunt is not something that he even talks about it. My aunt is not somebody that I was super close with. That's an understatement. He, for all intents and purposes, he hated his aunt. He hated, Rick. But still, it was the one connection he had back to his mom. It was the one connection he had back to like a normal life. It wasn't a normal life or anything like that, but life as he knew it was pretty much over at that point.
Yeah.
And
Nothing really
I'm talking real life, not Oasis life. There's a difference between the two, because what's the first thing he does? Very stupidly, as Aaron pointed out, he's going back into the Oasis, not even really thinking like, could they track me? Could they see that I'm still here? Could they see my avatar pop up and say, shit, we didn't get him? Like, the first thing he does is, I need to see a friendly face. Where's the only friendly face I can find? On the Oasis. So that just, to me, highlights the fact that in real life, there's no one left.
Yeah, he totally shed his physical life at that point.
Yeah.
I think that's poignant. And I don't even think the chapter nails it as well as you nail it. That he had two lives, but one is gone now. All that's left is his van and his headset. His van is the hub for the Oasis for him.
Mr. Anderson just became Neo.
He swallowed the blue pill or whichever pill.
No, Mr. Anderson is he's the he's sort of the alter. He's the thing that took the back seat. Neo is now, taking the Parzival is all he has left.
Yeah, absolutely.
As if it wasn't all he had before, but it definitely is now.
Right. Because he has no other options. I mean, where else does he go?
He doesn't even have a warm laundry room to stay in anymore.
There's no dryer sheets filling up his nostrils. It's this fucking van. Which, by the way, is not a good place to stay anymore.
Smells like old rubber and Cheetos.
What kind of rubber, Chris? Uncomfortable question of the episode. We'd normally edit this out, but I think we're going to let it ride. All right. So H and Parzival are connecting for, this is, I don't think it's the first time since he found the first gate. Is it?
No, since he talking
the second time, right?
Second time.
Yeah, because the first time was from within the tomb.
Yeah, no, the first time he talks to H after he finishes is when H is outside the tomb.
Right.
Yeah.
It's outside. Yeah.
When he's watching the news coverage, and the first time we meet Ogden Morrow in person and all that kind of thing. But now he's talking to H. He's, it says that he kind of gives him the whole dirty details of the situation, tells him that he actually sat down and met with Sorrento. I think we covered this in chapter 14. But I kind of want to revisit it now that we've got Aaron on the podcast. Would you have sat down with Sorrento?
Yeah, I thought about that a lot preparing for this podcast. And honestly, a good paragraph of my notes is all about me saying how stupid was he to even partake in this meeting without even a better plan. Like, this goes into the whole thing about him being an immature kid. Like, he didn't think through every possibility, especially after he was warned in the tomb by Artemis that he has information that people would be willing to kill for. And who has the means to kill for it?
IOI. The one person he's going to visit.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's like stepping into the lion's den with
but
raw meat.
At the time, he had no clue that Sorrento or IOI had the information on him that they had. And how would he? Because the only place they would have gotten it is from his school. And to think that your school would be the one to turn you over and basically make you a mark it's that departure from reality. You know what I mean? It's like, I think we talked about this before too, but I'll revisit it. It's like that scene in Clockwork Orange where Alex comes out of prison. And who does he go for? He goes for his two droogs, but they're now police officers, and they drag him into the woods and they beat him to death. So it's like your family dies, or your family's shit. You have this thing, come upon you. You have this opportunity to be the first person to find the egg. And who betrays you first? The one institution that should not betray you, your school. I mean, at that point, it had to be this occurrence of like, is there no place I can turn? Where, can I trust no one?
I think the last episode we chatted on this. My initial thought was I totally would have done it. because for me, it was just kind of a if you're anonymous, if you truly believe you're anonymous, then you can dance with the devil, and he doesn't know who you are. But that's kind of a conflict of terms there. That's just not going to work out. And in fact, in this chapter, a couple times he mentions in talking with everyone else that they had wisely ignored the emails they received, which means it kind of feels like there's a tinge of regret there. Not that it would have done any different. Like, he could have totally been blown up if he had ignored the emails. They would have been like, well, he's not going to answer. We know where he is. Boom, dead. That could have happened anyhow.
Sure.
But still, he comes out of that saying everyone else wisely ignored it, which kind of feels like they're writing in basically what you just said, which is that was just the dumbest thing in the world to have done. And now he knows it.
Especially after, like, if he didn't realize it before, after they have given him all this inside information about how they operate, including information that technically disqualifies them from the contest.
Which, just for the audience here, which information are you talking about specifically?
The hacked immersion rigs that, so that other people can use it. Because, like, they talk earlier in the book about anybody who gets caught faking retinal patterns loses their Oasis account and is disqualified from the contest.
Get caught. So they just told Wade, this is what we do. So now he has information that disqualifies them. He has information that they killed his family too, but no one would believe him.
They wouldn't. And I think that goes back to what Wade said, and we're talking chapter 14. I promise, guys, we'll move on from this. But honestly, like, it goes into what Wade said at the very end of chapter 14. I can't imagine that there's a way out of this. If they actually have a bomb in my place, it doesn't matter what happens, they're going to kill me. And that just further supports what he was thinking. I don't think he didn't bring that point up, but now that you bring it up, it's a really good point. They would have killed him anyways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was no way out of it for him. Okay, so anyways, we materialize on Ludus. There are Sixer gunships
on the chapter 15,
screaming from the atmosphere, coming at him. And who's behind this betrayal? How do all the Sixers know where Ludus is? How do they know where Wade was, where he went to school, all that kind of thing? One name.
Fucking IROC.
Fucking asshole. This guy. What a piece of shit.
God damn it, JT.
What a dick.
I mean, I still can't get my arms around the fact that being told that two people on the scoreboard were taking advantage of the best public school system available is somehow like, oh, Ludus.
Yeah.
So what? Like,
so,
of course that could be a possibility, but now all of a sudden that makes people think, oh, it could be on Ludus.
Well, I think he directly said, like, I think the whole idea behind it was IROC said, I know for a fact this kid is poor, can't get anywhere else, so he had to have found it on Ludus. There was no other way for him to find it.
That was the same logic that H had.
Yeah.
Well, that's the logic that H had and that H explains, but the book never says that IROC revealed anything other than that they're both students on Ludus.
Right.
So then they knew how to go and find his identity at the school.
Yeah. I think the bigger question is, how come IROC didn't figure out it was on Ludus before IOI?
Because IROC's a fucking dipshit.
He is a dipshit.
So this occurred to me, and this is I'm gonna swing wide right here, guys. I'm sorry, but there was something in current affairs, a topical thing here that happened this week that kind of reminded me of this situation. Okay, where you saw a situation where a guy who was out in California engaged in something called swatting. Now, swatting is when you are when you're gaming with somebody or you're online. And what you do is you call up your opponent's local jurisdiction, and you basically say there's something happening at the house that is awful, and you need to send a full team of police in there. I think in this situation, he said that he had shot his dad and they were holding the rest of the family hostage or something like that. what happens is the local police department sends a full SWAT team into this guy's house. He answers the door and makes the wrong move. Cops shoot him down. This is a 28-year-old father of two. That hits close to me because I'm a father of two, and I'd like to say I'm not too far from 28, but when I think about it, it really makes my stomach hurt. I'm farther than I'd like to be. But still, it's sort of the same. It's sort of the same thing. So I see it. I see a correlation with IROC here, where the things you do in the virtual universe, he expects have no consequence because he's been sort of numbed by the fact that he lives in this virtual world where you can do anything you want to somebody in there, but in the real world nothing happens to him. Well, what happens? He comes out in the real world and says, if you don't give me the location of the first key, then I'm going to out you to the entire world. And what happens? Wade's entire family gets killed. Now, he wasn't that close to him, sure, but if he was, this would be a much bigger deal. It's really close to the swatting incident. Do you see what I'm saying?
Swatted.
Yeah, he basically swatted him.
Yeah, that sucks. And I have a brother who's a police officer, and it is a shitty thing to do on both sides of the fence because you end up putting people who anticipate a bad situation into a situation that isn't bad, and they're going to respond under the artificial guise that it is. Sure. And in this case, someone got shot.
Because they don't know.
Yeah, they don't know. But yeah, I mean, that crossover into reality just shatters that anonymity that you think you've got.
But I mean, from the guy who called in the SWAT, right? I mean, he's thinking this is going to be funny. Nothing's going to happen from it. This is going to be something of no consequence in real life. I'm going to get this guy. And then I might hear about it on the news, might get a SWAT on the wrist, whatever. But what happens? The guy dies. There are real consequences to what you do online.
I think
we see
the general thinking. I think the general thinking there is that you're going to get a show where somebody breaks into the house and you get to see the police charge in and kick his ass on camera. In fact, did he get killed while he was on camera? And I know he died, he got shot, but did that happen while he was televising?
I don't know that the guy was televising to begin with.
Well, that's the reason why most people do the swatting, because it's a live stream. And thus you see the whole police action come in and see the dude getting taken down while he's playing a game.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Either way, shitty way to go.
Yeah. I mean, either way, it's I'm talking more from the perspective of the person who calls in the SWAT, I mean, that because that's IROC. And IROC has been presented throughout the book up to this point as somebody who's completely naive to consequences, or I mean, he can walk into a room of the elitist of gunters. I'm using quote fingers here, but the elitist of gunters, and say, I've got this thing that's an obvious reference, and I'm going to quiz you like it's hardcore trivia, and then gets his ass handed to him. You know what I mean? That's the mental state that we're dealing with here. I mean, it's sort of like he flagrantly gave Wade and H up without any thought of consequence. I don't know. I feel like it's sort of topical. I don't know.
It's the worst douchery that you could do to somebody virtually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if he were offered that money from IOI, he'd be rolling around in it on his bed.
Oh, yeah.
He's a douchebag. He wouldn't care that the rest of the Oasis would need to, spend a lot of money to subscribe and look at ads and whatever. He would just be like, heck, I can afford it now.
Yeah, I can see that.
Douchebag.
So future swatter IROC sells out Wade far before the beginning of this chapter, but I think it's kind of confirmed here with H saying this had to be it. Kind of confirming Wade's suspicions. Lets him know that he talked to Sorrento, and like we said before, I mean, at this point he kind of just breaks down. The meeting that he had with Sorrento breaks down, the shit that had happened to him in real life as a consequence of going up against IOI, or as a consequence of being the one who's just smart enough to figure it out. I mean, I don't know why, but for some reason this chapter hits me harder than chapter 14. It really does, because it's Wade coming to the realization that the only thing that he did wrong in this situation, it really is the only thing that he did wrong, was find it first, and his entire world has been destroyed.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I read this chapter too. My first thought, I think, rereading this at least, was how would I feel going into a situation knowing that there's only 4 people in the world that are going to believe me. There are people that are in my situation and they are powerless to help me. Like, there is nothing you could do. Imagine the biggest wrong that could be done to you that would still leave you alive, and knowing that you could not go to the police, the media, or anyone and have anyone actually believe that's the case. It's really just there's no justice in that point. So you feel completely helpless, completely powerless. And I was really just thinking when I read this, how powerless would I feel having that sort of thing happen to me or attacked at me and narrowly escape and be basic. There's nothing I can do about that. Just no way that I can get back at them.
And you're 18 at the time. You're a child.
Yeah. You're an idiot. 18-year-olds are idiots.
You're a fucking idiot. This is a Rubik's Cube, and you're barely playing checkers here.
I was just kind of comparing it, and we can reflect back on current events, but a certain undercurrent of powerlessness at least has company in the masses, and company in the masses can come together and sort of support each other and stand outside in front of whatever, holding signs saying, there's a fucking million of us. It's not one voice that's small. It's 11 million voices that are relatively small by themselves, but at least you've got the power of them coming together under a single purpose. He doesn't have that here.
Right.
It's just got 4 other people that don't care to actually help each other.
Right.
They make that very clear.
I mean, they're opponents. They are opponents. For all intents and purposes, they are all opponents. And you've got to, okay, so let's flip the script here. This book is written from the perspective of Wade, right? I mean, he's our narrator. But imagine this from the perspective of, say, H or Artemis, probably more specifically Artemis, right? Do you look at Wade and say, did this really happen? Did he see something like stacks getting blown up on the news and thought he could throw us off the scent? Like, is there an inch of skepticism that she carries throughout the book? Just does not trust him because she's sort of maybe a little bit skeptical that this situation happened or not.
I think that she has a bit of implied trust of him because of the meeting in the Tomb of Horrors. Sure. You know, like she had, like they very quickly had a rapport, and she went through that whole speech about how like she respects him as a gunter and all that. So maybe that connection is just like this glue with them, and like suddenly it's like, oh well, I don't know.
I know exactly what Chris is about to say. Go ahead.
That entire interaction that they first had was founded on 2 sides of 2 different lies, though. It was her buttering him up in order to get him to help her when she obviously was struggling with the Tomb of Horrors. And it was him lying to her in order to cover his ass that he had the key. Like, none of that was true.
Lie. The first thing they did to each other was lie.
So it's like they were on a date or something.
It's like they met at a bar. It's like they met at a bar, and they're both trying to put on like the best fake facade that they could for each other, knowing that their real life just is not going to work. Yeah, I mean, it was only until she realized he had the key, and then she called his ass out and got real, and then he finally kind of broke down and got real. But it wasn't until she drug his ass out onto the carpet and said, "Hey, you did this thing." It's like, "Oh, okay, you got me." So I could see. I think it's a great perspective that maybe from Artemis's perspective or anyone else's, that somebody else might look at him and go, "Really?
You're playing the long con."
Yeah,
You're working us.
I mean, I think it's a good point from Parzival's perspective. Yeah, this meeting is going to happen. It's going to be great. But like, if it were written from anyone else's perspective, except for maybe H, why do you go to this meeting?
Well, that's a good segue into the next point in the chapter. So this is the first meeting of the High Five. That's what we've been talking about. The High Five is the top 5 people on the scoreboard. And right now that consists of Parzival. It consists of Artemis, of course, H, and Daito, and Shoto. And what they basically decide to do is Wade, his initial, I guess, intention for calling H is to warn him. And we'll break this up a little more as we go on, but I think it's sort of telling throughout the book that like the first person he thinks to call is H and not Artemis. But I don't know. There might be something to be extracted there. But he calls up H and, you know, lets him know the situation. He says, you know what, let's open up the chat room to the High Five and let's warn them all about what's happening right now. That IOI is reaching out and blowing up people's houses and shit like that. So they decide to do that. Wade gets there a little bit early. H hugs him, lets him know everything's going to be okay. And before a few minutes can pass, Artemis is walking down the stairs. Before you know it, the whole chat room is populated with the High Five. And that sort of picks up where we left off there. The question, Aaron, you brought up, why the hell would these 5 get together in the first place? I think, because I thought about that too. Like, why would you enter a room filled with the people that you are, for all intents and purposes, opposing in this competition? But I think Artemis kind of lays it out. And she says, how could I miss this? Because every single one of them assumes that they are the smartest person in the room. And if you get the 5 people who are the farthest along in this competition in one room, somebody might spill some beans. I think that's their thought. I think that's all of their thought going on.
I think that the logic here at the very least is like if you took like the 5 greatest competing musicians in any particular genre, yeah, they're going to be kind of like fans of each other to an extent, because they all in their own right found the key on their own, even if it's exposed that there was kind of like they're passing around, well, he was there first, or he hinted me to this, and then it made sense because of that. But what it really comes down to is they all use their own natural senses to kind of detect or discern where the place was. And they're all have sort of like an equal mutual admiration of each other. I mean, why wouldn't you want to meet both your enemy and possibly your most respected adversaries at least once? I'm done.
This may be hinting a little bit down the road, so I'm going to try to be discreet.
You can toss out like a light spoiler here and there.
But I can see H and Artemis being all for it. But based on the actions of Daito and Shoto later, I don't understand why they're in this chat room, except for maybe one thing. And it goes back to the conversation in the tomb between Artemis and Parzival, is that she was dying to talk to somebody about this. And so now someone set up a meeting where we can all talk about it. You know, they can get things off their chest. They got this far. They know. That's the only motivation, I think, for Daito and Shoto, but they can still talk to themselves about it.
I think, and I might be way off base here, but I think there's an honor code. I think that's the reason they're in the room, because they make a point to say, we would not have found this without you. And they even ask shortly thereafter, like, why are we here right now? Like, I think they're there because they realize they would not have found it without them.
Yeah, but they also made a point to, like, when Shoto implied that they found out because of the forum post, Daito, elbows him and says, "Keep quiet, blabbermouth."
Right.
As if nobody was going to figure out or didn't know already that that's how, like, of course they are there because they put 2 and 2 together because of the forum posts. That's obvious. There's no reason to hide that.
Well, I think it might be embarrassing from a perspective of people who perceive themselves as the best, and then admitting that they're not, or that they had to rely on somebody else in order to get the answer. And then there's a kind of I don't want to say shame, but shame is kind of a part of this whole conversation, honor-wise, to shut the heck up. Stop shaming me for having figured it out because of this way, right? But still, there is this, I think just the incentive to go there is just the ability to meet the person the honor of meeting the person who made it possible for you to get the key, even if you didn't admit that they made it possible to get the key.
And again, if you're talking fanfic, this would be an excellent fan fiction chapter to talk about Dido and Shoto talking about going into the first high five meeting. I would love to see that scene of the two of them going back and forth as to what the merits are, why they should not go there. Because they clearly, they're not in sync when they go in. One of them, the ones that, is fine with being there. The other one is not. And it would make such a great dynamic chapter. It kind of makes me wish that Ernest Cline, when he written this book, had split off into those alternate storylines here and there. Every now and again, you get a chapter from a different perspective.
Well, he needs to write it like Game of Thrones, where you have a chapter from each perspective. That would have been awesome.
Or, he could just put out, 4 other books or 3 other books? That is the same story from every character's perspective, and I would buy each one of those maybe 15 times and then give them all away to people.
Yeah. We'll see how the movie plays.
I'm all for that. I'm all for that, but I want him to write Anorak's Almanac first.
Yeah, that would be super cool. That'd be a neat collectible, right?
I think the onus is on us to write Anorak's Almanac at this point. We might be the most qualified. I include Ernest Cline in that. We have spent way too much time talking about this book. I wonder, you know what I want to do? We've talked about 1,000 times, like the one question we would ask Ernest Cline if he were on the podcast. We were talking about it just before we started recording. And I think the one question I would ask him is, how long did it take you to write the book? Like hours wise, not like, like I wrote an hour here and then there was the rest of a day. And then, so of course it took 3 years to write the book. Hours wise, just give me a guesstimate. I wonder how much time it took to write the book versus how much it has taken for us to talk about it. If they even compare.
I'm not sure I want to know that one.
I don't want to know either. Or how much time you've taken to like research it or read it. I would be.
Go ahead.
I would be curious to know if because there's a lot of information that he pulls, from the 80s era and puts it into the book. And how much of that did he just know versus how much did he have to go on Wikipedia and be like, okay, that's the right line from that movie, or I want to know how much of it was actually just kind of bubbling in his brain versus how much he had to kind of he already kind of knew, but he needed some reinforcement.
Well,
I'd be very curious.
One of the things you brought up when we were talking about notes for this episode, great segue into the next part. You had talked about how Artemis walks in and says this is an exact replica of Halliday's boyhood home.
Yeah, no, Morrow. She says you've recreated Morrow's basement perfectly. She says,
yeah, and when we talked about H's basement way back in, I think it was the 3rd or 4th chapter.
Probably, yeah.
We didn't say anything about it being a recreation of Morrow's basement, did we?
Nope.
It was just a basement circa 1984 or whatever. I forget the exact line. I should have pulled it up as part of my notes, but it never says that he recreated the basement that, Morrow and Halliday were doing their, gregarious games.
So there's two ways to look at this. One, Ogden Morrow, I don't think, or maybe he'd been mentioned at that point in the book, but he hadn't been mentioned as somebody who would be like a consequential part of the book. I think if you read the prologue, you probably assume that he will be, which seems weird that they would leave it out. But, maybe they weren't trying to, or maybe he was trying not to tip off that this was going to be a pivotal point in the book. Or maybe it was retconned. We're not really sure. But at the end of the chapter, at the end of this very chapter, we have a situation happen that tips off to something we find out a little bit later in the book.
A little bit later.
How do we really want to cover that?
I don't even know where. I'm not sure where you're going with this.
Okay, so
that. Yeah.
So, and when Aaron brought this up, I thought it was a really good point. I think this is the first evidence that we have that Ernest Cline retconned the story as he was going along. If that's the case, I kind of have a little more respect for how the book was written, because he was kind of feeling it out as he went. You know,
maybe he thought, like, halfway through, he's like, we really need this other character, and then he goes back and kind of inserts hints of him.
Well, he found a good insertion point. And if he was thinking so far ahead that he would introduce Ogden Morrow as a pivotal character in the book, and I don't think it's a huge spoiler to say that Ogden Morrow is a huge pivotal character in the book, because I think maybe 3 chapters ago, the entire chapter was about Ogden Morrow, so you know he's coming up. Right. He's gonna have something to do with it. But, you know, I mean, like, for them to go back and say this is a complete recreation of Ogden Morrow's basement, and then at the very end of the chapter, for the thing to happen, it almost seemed like when he was writing this chapter, he had that revelation of this is how I incorporate him into the end of the book. Or maybe he went back and fit that in. I don't know.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I didn't quite pick up on that. I thought this was kind of like an introductory thing.
So there's
but you're really just saying, like, how does he get incorporated into their lives?
Right.
And this is that minor hint that will explain that point later on.
Yeah. So if you haven't read the book yet, which if you're listening to this podcast, I think that's maybe 1 or 2 of you. But if the 1 or 2 of you who haven't read this book yet, for some reason, paused and waited for this podcast to come back out, first of all, I'm really fucking sorry. But secondly, I do want to say, just shut this off for maybe the next minute or 2. Okay. There's a point at the very end of the chapter where a stack of books or a stack of magazines or something like that gets shoved off of a table, right? And we don't find out until later in the book that is basically the specter of Ogden Morrow in the room, listening to what's happening in that conversation, being there for the first meeting at the high five.
Yeah,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I thought that was kind of interesting, because it actually comes to point, like, is there somebody here that's invisible? Like, that's a thing. Like, that could be a thing. Like, he's troubleshooting his paranoia. And I'm thinking, because I just finished playing a game last night that's in an alpha state, and when I see something bug, it does something wholly unusual, like parking a gargantuous ship and accidentally hitting a bar and it flapping around like a flag in the wind.
Sure.
That's wholly unusual. This was like naturally the books sliding off and falling onto the ground. I would expect in a bug, the books would fall off and then jerk back into place and then rubber band a little bit. Like, it's weird that they would describe
knock everything
it as
else
a bug.
off the shelves.
and see, and here's the thing that bothers me about these comic books falling off the shelf, right? So, you know, and we're still in spoiler territory, so if people are hopefully not listening right now, but if Ogden Morrow is, you know, like, reach for these comic books and knocks them over, right? Someone was going to notice this invisible avatar manipulating comic books. What was he doing?
I think it was an accident. I think he admits that he was being clumsy.
But, like, so you just stand still.
Right, and you evaporate out of there, or whatever godlike feature you have to your avatar.
You hit the pause button on your magical screen of actions that you can do. Sit on the stairs, you know.
Don't go bumbling around and knocking shit off a shelf.
No, was he drunk?
Probably what it was he's like, wow, somebody got this right. He probably goes to that room all the time. Every time it's up, he's like, it's just like being in my boyhood home. This is awesome. I'm just hanging out. Oh, wait, there's a meeting going on? Oh, yeah. Shit, I want to listen to this.
But okay. I'm going to break apart from spoiler territory here.
All right.
If you're skipping ahead and you're looking for a place to break away from spoilers, this is it. Welcome back to the podcast. we're going to rewind a little bit. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the dynamic of the high five during their first meeting. Now, it seems pretty friendly at first. We get sort of what I think Ray, if for those of you who don't know, Ray is the super fan of Ready Player One. Angie Ray, if you're listening, we love you. We'll talk to you soon, I'm sure. She finds the skeeziness in Wade almost unbearable at times. And I gotta admit, if there's one time that I find Wade's skeeziness unbearable, it's in this moment when he starts to get jealous of Artemis and H talking. I cringed a little bit. It was hard to hear.
In the context of the fact that his life just got blown up right in front of his face, and he's still thinking about, his second head.
What's the next worst thing that could happen? Your best friend hitting on the girl that you're totally in love with. Like, my life just got destroyed, and now I'm having a meeting where my best friend is totally chatting it up and impressing the girl that's the love of my life. I'm going to be honest with you. My internal dialogue would be, stop fucking talking to her.
Stop it, man.
I would never say it because that would be me being a skeezy asshole, but deep down inside, I would totally feel it.
Yeah.
At least at that age.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of it. I don't think he's really, this is kind of a dark thing, but I don't really think he's thinking about the fact that everything he knew just got blown up. I think he's more thinking about the fact that somebody's looking cooler than him, or somebody's got one up on him, and like that's what makes
the first girl he's ever spoken to is talking to someone else
and loving on his room.
Yes,
like I want to be here all the time, and he's like, "You've got an open invitation, girl. That's awesome." I'd be like, "All right, we got to talk about stuff."
Yeah, chill out.
Let's move on.
T. No, but but to the same degree, I would offer this as a counterpoint. He's talking about somebody like not only like Artemis does he have some feelings for, but also H is somebody who he has always competed with. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's rough. Yeah, that sort of alpha competition thing going on.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just like it's your best friend, but at the same time, it's also your strongest competition. If there's somebody that you think would take the girl away from you, it's going to be this guy with the Cheshire grin coming
and
in.
The kick-ass basement. Yeah, and and on top of that, they both have a lot in common because they're both, as far as the Oasis is concerned, competitors in the Oasis, not just for the egg, but in their own right. They are ass kickers and they are popular. They're both kind of like super bloggers, if you will, with the activities that they do. So yeah, he has every right to feel threatened.
And I think too, he's always, the way that he references H every now and again, it feels kind of hollow, but he says like, this is the only other person than me that can do this. And it always feels, it rings kind of hollow because what he seems to be saying is, this is somebody that I respect. But Artemis is the only other person in the book that he talks about like that. Because when he talks about Dido and Shoto, he never really talks about them. Like, of course he respects them, but at the same time, he doesn't talk about them with the same kind of reverence that he talks about Artemis and H. I think he holds them both up on like a pedestal. And, whether or not he'll admit it, he considers himself slightly below that pedestal.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
So
this is a psychology podcast, folks.
So if we can just quickly jump into slight spoiler territory, because there's part of this exchange they have about how great the basement is and the invitation to go back there that I'm pretty sure I did not pick up on the first time I read it, but the second time you notice it. So we'll do a spoiler alert, sort of. But there's the line where, where H says, you have a permanent spot on the guest list. Come on down anytime. She says, really? Thank you. You are the man, H. And then he says, yes, it's true.
Yeah.
I am.
I think
when I read that, or I should say, when I had Will
You
Wheaton
got it.
sweetly read it to me, you're right. That part just stood out
Yes.
because I was like, that's funny.
It's one of those things you don't pick up on because it just seems like normal banter. But then the second time, it's like, I see what you were doing there. You got me.
Second or third read kind of stuff.
That is nice.
I just had to mention that because, first, it's on my screen right now, and it's just like staring at me, and I'm like, yeah, that was great.
So, for all intents and purposes, the rest of this exchange is fairly formal. Wade basically gives them the lowdown on how threatening IOI actually is, sort of their plan for taking over the contest, and the lengths that they're really willing to go to. Dido and Shoto, I want to talk about this before we end the podcast tonight. We touched on it before, but I think it deserves its own little moment in the spotlight. The interaction between Wade, H, and Artemis seems fairly natural. Like, it almost seems like old friends.
Mm.
But Dido and Shoto are really kind of like standout characters in this part of the chapter. Like, they almost seem like one of them doesn't want to be there. The other one is like really kind of clamoring to make the pair feel like they belong. It just seems like a very out of sync coupling between the two of them.
It kind of becomes clear that it's they're not necessarily equals.
Sure.
Like, one is subservient, if that's a word, right? Subservient.
It is.
Subservient.
Yeah.
Like he gets elbowed by Dido. Like, keep quiet, blabbermouth. Like, treating him like a child. I mean, like,
little brother. That's what he calls him.
Yeah.
Little brother.
And like the first time I read this, I'm like, I'm picturing like what it was like to be the younger brother and being harassed by your older brother, and like they're not acting like equals,
and they're definitely not. I mean, these are avatars. Your height doesn't have to be your actual height. You can be a gargantuan monster if you want to. But here it actually portrays, one is sort of the master and the other one is sort of the servant. One is a whole foot taller than the other. And that doesn't have to be the case in the Oasis. But in this situation, it almost visually symbolizes the perspective that the two have of each other. To the point that I think you were getting at.
Yeah. And it also makes me kind of think that Dido is a real dick.
Right. Well, and the thing that I think, and I'm going to, as I end every podcast, it seems like I'm going to throw back to is like, I feel like this is Ernest Cline. He really has a skill for throwing you a red herring, because I think one of the biggest surprises in the book, aside from some of the others that if you've read through the entire book, you probably know about, but is the relationship between Dido and Shoto. To me, when I read that part in the book, later on, you'll find out later on in the book, like, the relationship between Dido is sort of an understated part of the book. It's very small, but to me, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, like, the relationship between the two of them is not what it seems. And you'll find that out later in the book, which makes this whole dynamic much fucking weirder.
Mm.
It's not a player one, player two situation.
Yeah, I get that. As I went through the book the first time, I think I had the same sort of conclusion, and maybe that's a purposeful conclusion that he's a dick. But as I progressed through and as the characters grew, there's a depth to that relationship that throws into a weird sort of oddity of the kinds of relationships and dynamics you can have in a virtual world that would not exist in the real world, or at least not how you would come to it. That in this world, you can be someone's brother in an almost literal way in the virtual world and not have to be blood, but you can accept him as that and then the Oasis reflects that out in the constructs of their character. You look at them and you go, one looks like a younger version of the other by about 5 years.
Yeah. Like snapshots of the same young man taken 5 years apart.
Exactly. It's one of the most genius parts of the book that the lines between friend, family, people that you meet on the internet are completely blurred in the future. It's all about the connection that you make with somebody.
And I think that dips back to that. If you've ever had friends that were so close they were adopted family, I think that's the closest you can come to in the real world. That's reflected way more literally in the virtual world.
Which ties back to the very beginning of the chapter when Wade says, I just need to see a friendly face.
That's actually the end of the previous chapter.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, whatever.
It starts to blend.
It's all the same. We're going to blur the lines a little.
It's all the same. But the idea being that where does he go? You know, when he's pressed, where does he find family? And it almost seems like, you know, I mean, we discovered this for the, you know, through the first half of the book. I don't think we're quite through half of the book yet, but we're close. But it's, you know, that line between what is family and what is not, what is, you know, what is close to you and what is not is completely blurred by this interface that, you know, resembles reality. And if, you know, I mean, there are parallels to be drawn with the whole, you know, with you know, simulation theory and things like that. When you get that deep into, you know, when you get to the inception point of you know, of you know, these kinds of simulations, like what is the beginning and end of reality? Who is your family and who's not? You know, I mean,
sure.
it's one of the interesting parts of the book that I think goes underexamined by the people who just decide to holy shit on it by reading as some sort of young adult novel and not embracing just kind of the fun of it right off the top.
Yeah, I mean, from an overall perspective, I consider the book to be like Animaniacs. You can say that it's for kids, but as an adult, I would watch Animaniacs if it was still playing today because it is so intelligent and there's several layers of depth that kids just won't get. But to just say it's a children's cartoon is just wholly unfair to the art of it.
It's not playing today, and I still watch Animaniacs.
So, if you don't care, can I reflect on something that I took away? Because you guys have covered like a ton of stuff that I didn't even think about.
Please.
But there is like an overarching concept here that I noticed when I was looking at this, which was this is the first time I felt in the book that there was a jumping off point for character development. Because come the end of this chapter, we are looking at several examples of pride and ego and arrogance that all of them end up growing out of. But you have to start somewhere. And this chapter starts with their flaws coming together, kind of like superheroes that are wholly independent and all believe they kick major superhero ass. And then you say, okay, you 5 superheroes are going to come together and you're going to have to work together. And they're like, screw that. I'm a loner. I'm a superhero. Screw you all. You have that initial conflict where they don't understand each other's weaknesses and strengths, but eventually down the road, they're going to have to grow. But you have to start with the conflict. And in here, the conflict is Parzival, in his lowest point, won't accept money from H. His pride is too deep. And they've even mentioned before, like H wouldn't offer money to him because that would be an insult. H now is breaking his own rule by saying, that's beyond scope. Dude, let me help you. Do you need a place to crash? Do you need some cash? Let me help you. Parzival's pride won't let it happen. Artemis is like, you know what? I'm doing this myself. You know that if you got it, you wouldn't share. And if I got it, I wouldn't share. So let's just incorporate her greed into the mix. Daito and Shoto are a total level of sort of ego and pride. We're better than everyone else. We only work together. I think you're trying to say we should come together. Forget you guys. We're walking. That there's this base level of conflict that they're going to end up growing out of. And I kind of liked this chapter for that reason, because it acts as the springboard of flaws that they're going to have to grow out of.
Yeah. See, I noticed the same thing, but particularly with Parzival and H, because from the first words of the chapter to the last words of the chapter, it's basically flipping a coin. You know, it starts out with Parzival or H giving Parzival a hug, you know, like, man, you just went through hell. I'm so sorry. This sucks. We're going to get back at them. No, don't worry about it. And then when they part, it's like, we got to work on the next key. So
Yeah.
you're on your own now.
He does still offer him a place to crash. Like that last couple paragraphs is kind of like, are you sure you don't need money and a place to crash? So it's kind of like this, even though we're going to work independently because that's what we do, I'm still reaching out to you. And I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. And even Artemis kind of has a hint of like, you know, I guess would it be so bad if we had an alliance? But then she says, well, I'm the lone wolf type. So adios, boys. You know, like it's such a weird chapter like that.
I know she played that like she was just watching it for entertainment. Like she could pull out a bucket of popcorn. It's just like, you boys go at it.
Yeah, she was just watching them whip their dicks out. It was great.
That thought hadn't crossed my mind, but that's a good point.
Before we stop, I do want to hit on something that when I read it, I remember when I first read the book, I kind of like doubled back on this because I thought I had missed something. I don't blame you, he said. Thank God you weren't home when it happened. Now, I read that part back to myself like 1,000 times. Like the I don't blame you part. And I'm probably overthinking it now that I think back on it. But when I initially read it, I read it as I don't blame you for the shit coming down.
It's neat that you read it that way, or at least initially that it hit you that way. Because just coming into the chapter, I could totally see why you'd think the chapter might go in that direction, or that somebody else might blame him, like, you freaking idiot. Why did you accept the email?
Yeah.
You know, at that point when I first heard it, I was thinking that everyone else would be super critical of Parzival for even opening the damn email.
Yeah. And the way that the conversation begins with H almost being like, you did what? You talked to who?
Yeah, I was afraid shit was going to go down between them at that point.
Yeah. Because it you know, and tying back to the beginning of the conversation, was kind of a stupid thing to do. I mean, depending on which side you stand on. I get why he did, though. I mean, I understand why he did. I don't know that I would have done the same thing, but I understand why.
I gotta wonder, because here he's blaming IROC, but the fact of the matter is that this is all a problem because he invited an asshole down into his basement because he's fun to make fun of. That was the response when Parzival asked him, why do you let that asshole come in here? He reminds me of how cool we are. That was the gist of it. He reminds me of how smart we are, and he's fun to poke. And now, in a sick sort of way, this is IROC's way of poking back. And it's really H's fault, which is not anything that the book gets into pointing blame. But if H hadn't brought him down for the fun of shitting on, this wouldn't be a problem.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Fuck you, H.
And fuck you, IROC. Well, do you guys have anything else about chapter 15?
Oh man, I'm ready to reread chapter 16.
Chapter 16 will be coming up soon. As soon as we can get it down. But yeah, chapter 16 will be coming up. Guys, it's excellent to be back. We've been waiting to come back. It was we took a little hiatus there. Just to be completely transparent. I mean, part of it was burnout. Part of it was just us trying to figure out how we wanted to structure the podcast and everything like that. You know, and it's been a good little time of reflection for us. But we're back now. We're happy to have Aaron here. Aaron, I think I don't want to speak for you, but I'm pretty sure you're going to be a regular part of the podcast going forward, right?
Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun. This is great. I would do this maybe not every day, but every other day.
Every day would be a bit much.
Just a wee bit. I'll tell you, I saw the second trailer and I felt I had been avoiding the first trailer because I was also experiencing a degree of burnout. But that second trailer hit, and I was like,
There's a tug.
"Oh fuck yeah! I've got to get back into this. I've got to get back into this." I've seen that trailer like at least 24 times. It's just because it raises the hairs on the back of my neck. So I was like, "Nope, no, we got to get back online. Got to do this."
And sometime soon we'll need to do a reaction. It won't really be a reaction podcast about
breakdown
the second trailer, but yeah, let's do a breakdown sometime in the next week or so. At any rate, this has been and always will be Get to the Good Part. My name is Ryan.
My name's Chris.
And I'm Aaron.
And that has been Get to the Good Part. We'll see you next week. In case anybody's been wondering, since the end of season 1 is what we're going to call it, Chris has been doing yoga with his mouth. The things you're doing with your mouth right now make me insanely uncomfortable. I just want to say that.
I just wanted to stretch out. I wanted to get the chops kind of just trying to loosen the lips a little bit.
Loosen them. Get them loose. Aaron, you feel pretty loose there in the lips?
I will once I've gotten through more of this drink.
Okay, there we go.